So I want to thank you again for doing this. I know I've kind of been bugging you about it a little bit the past few weeks, but I think considering what's been going on since the storm, and from talking to different conservation groups, it seems like their volunteer efforts are really central in actually going out and getting the different creeks and things cleaned up.
Right.
But obviously, with the Clean Wilson's Creek, you guys have been doing it like the last 8 years or so?
We started, I guess, in earnest. We formed sort of in late 2017 with the idea and the concept, and then kind of launched in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And then spent the next 2 years in kind of a developmental mode of framing the organization, figuring out how to make it sustainable over the long run, and putting in place a lot of the bone structure about volunteerism and getting people excited and involved, kind of motivated. The one thing organizations really have to do is, I think, create enthusiasm rather than focus on sometimes the task at hand, which is not that easy to be enthusiastic about, which is picking up garbage. But we spent the next 2 years forming the core, the basis, kind of learning how to run a nonprofit, working with relationships beyond the community involved in the bureaucracies, like the Forest Service and Colorado County government and things like that.
Yeah.
And then by 2019, we got sponsored by the Forest Service and moved into more of an action mode, where we really began, I think, having a bigger impact on the trash problems. And at the same time, while we were removing trash and more garbage and man-made debris from the waterfront over that time, we were really understanding the need we had to have about building partnerships. Because if you just saw yourself as this entity that was going to solve this problem on this 15 miles of river, that was really short-sighted, and you realized you were going to be both overwhelmed and burned out real fast. So we kind of spent the next phase of Clean Wilson Creek developing those relationships, kind of pulling together partners and educating them about what we were doing in the watershed and asking for their help and support. And by doing that, we were able to branch out into some bigger projects, like cleaning out a dump site that had been there since probably the 1950s. And Foothills Land Conservancy acquired that land and worked with Duke Energy to move it into a conservation easement. Then we were able to pull a lot of these groups together to come in and remove over 24,000 pounds of garbage from this half a mile of the river.
Wow.
Really.
Just part of the river that they used as a dump site.
Yeah, they've been pulling up to the bank over this 150-foot drop down into a plateau on the riverfront. And they just, the community, landscapers, whoever, had just been pulling over and dumping it over the side down this chute for probably 50 years. So there were 485 tires, I think, we pulled out of there, stuff like that. Kind of sad, but it was really cool to reclaim that land. And we were working on a committee, a consulting group that Foothills had pulled together to begin looking at how to use that property in a recreational and community focused manner, as possibly hiking trail and educational spot. And then the hurricane hit.
Oh, so it was that soon between the cleanup of that site?
Well, we started in 2020, early 2023, I believe, cleaning the site, and we had help from a number of organizations. Our volunteers, Latinos Aventureros out of Morganton, brought in a group and helped us remove a huge amount of tires. We had an off-roading group called Venture Unknown that met for a overnight weekend down there to help us winch out a lot of heavy debris and things like that. So it was over 2 years we really got the site almost completely cleaned from the dump site debris.
As far as much as you can.
Yeah. And then of course now most of the homes upriver, or the sheds and structures that were part of Brown Mountain Beach Resort are now down in that area. So I haven't even honestly had the heart to go look at it, but I've heard how bad it is. So pretty much everything we did was erased and probably added to what was before. So,
or at least you already did that work, so at least the work is not still there underneath all of the.
it's new garbage,
garbage,
debris, roofs, sheds, lumber.
Yeah.
But you know, there again, I think the thing we proved is that you can put a bunch of hands together and recover a place like that in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah.
The challenge now lies in the fact that the entire 15 miles of river upstream are spotted with all kinds of man-made debris that first have to be identified and mapped.
Yeah.
And you know, all that has to be done also in the face of a lot of safety hazards on the river. That the river's not the same as it was geomorphically or channel-wise. Channels have been moved, the waterfront's been moved. There's masses of biodebris, you know, biomass everywhere that is really dangerous because it's shifting. You have logs and debris hanging in trees where the floodwaters were, 20, 25 feet above the normal river height. So if you look at recreational use, which normally during the summer would occur, you'd have groups of kids playing on the beach, and now you've got debris hanging in the trees.
After the hurricane, we went out to the Todd area after a river girl, and we got photos of some of their kayaks hanging from the trees out there.
Oh yeah,
along that part of the river. So
yeah,
and I can only imagine with Wilson's Creek, just the geography of it, where it sits right at the base of Grandfather Mountain. So everything up above it.
It was a massive deluge, and it had to be, if you were down there when this was taking place, if you could have filmed what was happening from a drone or above and the sounds, it must have been apocalyptic, because you're having mudslides and masses of timber, flumed down in that, water volume, bending bridges and taking away houses. I mean, it had to be just pretty crazy.
I can only imagine, especially not just what happened in 2024, but 100 years ago when they had that big storm that I think wiped out or tried to wipe out most of the town of Mortimer, but that area was really impacted then too. Yeah,
it was. I think it was definitely a three-peat of. It was the third of massive floods. Some people, the folks that study these things, are feeling like this one, in terms of volume of water, was actually bigger than the other two.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Yeah, some of the landscape had changed enough to where, like the center we operated out of, the old 1930s Mortimer Base Camp, it didn't get flooded or breached because a new bridge had been put in recently near there that I think diverted some of the water. But
that's pretty fortunate.
Yeah, there were. It was probably most fortunate that no lives were lost, and boy, that was some really close calls. There were some people that were right there on the edge of probably being drowned that escaped, and that's always pretty traumatic. So they were lucky that nobody lost their life that night or those 2 days.
So, kind of going back a little bit, what you were talking about when you're starting this effort to keep the creek clean for people who swim there, fish there, just recreate there in general. I'm sure in that process, like you said, you have to learn to work with a lot of different groups who also have a stake and who are also passionate about preserving the river. And I'm sure as the post-Helene efforts began and continued, kind of relationships only really kind of strengthened and helped get different groups down there to not only look at the environmental damage, but also the people who live down there who maybe had their homes washed away.
Right. Well, the first priority we had after the flood in early October, once we were able to get down there and the roads were cleared, which took about a week, to get down in there to see the damage, the first priority we had was toward the community, helping the community, helping the Betsy Store community and campground. It was really almost a feeling of a village that had been bombed. People were kind of shell shocked. And there were about 5 residents who lived in campers down there, kind of tentatively, and didn't have a lot of other place to go. Then the Betsy's management and the folks that ran the store were there. And then further up road, there was quite a large Edgemont living community, people that lived and commuted in and out of Edgemont. And one of their major bridges was completely gone, isolating several houses. So the first thing that happened was Caldwell County government and the sheriff's department got food and supplies and water in there to the folks. And then it was just a matter of weeks and weeks passing where people tried to get grounded about where to start, what was needed. And of course, what was needed initially was to get the bridge, temporary bridge put up so that people could crosswalk to their homes. And then the actual bridge was rebuilt in a pretty short period of time, in about a month and a half. So
that's pretty incredible.
The attention to the roads was amazing by DOT. I still boggles my mind how they were able to reopen so many roads so quickly, given the level of the damage that went on and the amount of boulders that had to be hauled in to shore up banks and recreate bends in the road and river.
I can only imagine what that effort was like, just beginning with everything. Just because if you go down there, people that haven't been down there, I mean, it's a very narrow area,
right?
Just to get along, and everyone has the experience of people coming around a corner and trying not to hit each other hand on or nick each other's cars.
Luckily, I missed on that count a couple weeks back during the ice storm and had a head-on collision with our truck. So
I've been down there before where they're trying to pull jeeps and different things out of ditches.
It's been a challenge for the last since the world in Western North Carolina as a whole, as you know, has changed dramatically. And I think the thing that people have to back up and realize and kind of take a breath about is that this recovery ecologically, first of all, the recovery from property and home damage is still going to require a lot of years ahead for people to try to reestablish. I mean, we've been in and helped gut some homes, get the flood debris out, take the drywall out, get them down to studs, treat the lumber with solutions to divert mold and reduce mold, and then they've got to decide: can I rebuild? Do I want to rebuild? What damage has been done that we can't see? And then you've got the surroundings of your beautiful yard and landscaping is completely gone. I mean, it's a lot of very difficult decisions people have to make, and particularly going west toward Asheville, Swananoa, Bat Cave areas, there's those areas were even more devastating.
I haven't been out that way since the storm, which for a lot of that, there was a lot of roads and different things that were closed and blocked off. Maybe not as much recently, but
right.
I mean, just down at Wilson's Creek, I could imagine just the way that area is shaped, that it really got a lot of
it's very concentrated into almost a gorge, and then
there's not a whole lot of people down there.
No, you have gorge areas where the walls of the sides of the gorge are really tight with a lot of big boulders, and you have flat areas. And what happened was that in the flat areas, particularly, the volume of water spread out and increased the width of the river by several hundred yards in places, and took out all the riparian zone, the rhododendrons, the vegetation that grew amongst the boulders on the sides of the river. A lot of that is almost wiped clean, to where I think the best analogy that a friend of mine who's a freshwater biologist and toxicologist studies, the macroinvertebrates and the trout habitat and things like that. The best thing we liken it to is it looks like an Alaskan river now. It's massively wide, and all the vegetation is gone that was there, kind of keeping it shaded and fostering the habitat for nesting and spawning and insect life. So there's going to be a lot of biological changes that are going to occur on the river, and there's a lot of unknowns about how that's going to regenerate. We really see signs that biologically the river's coming back pretty quickly with the insect and the macroinvertebrates and the fly hatches and rises and things kind of coming back, but they're a lot in different places now.
Yeah.
But I think the real test for the trout habitat will be, as we talked about at Trout Unlimited meeting, it will be the water temperature and how this affects the water temperature. I think the bugs will be available to a large degree for the trout to eat, but the temperatures were already, even last summer before the hurricane, getting on up there, even into waters and headwater areas that were
Now,
concerning.
is that because when a lot of those buffer zones get wiped out, we have a lot of the trees and rhododendron
Right.
hang over the creek,
Right.
that in turn increases the temperature?
Oh yeah, it's shading and
Mhm.
also the depth of the water.
Mm.
And one thing we have to keep in mind is that the depth of the water has been dramatically reduced
Mm.
in many areas of the river, which were prime habitat.
Yeah.
Now they're silted, so you have sandbars and silting along the bottom that's reduced what might have been a 2.5 foot riffle through a section now into a foot. So you're spreading the water out. The depth of the water is thinner.
Mhm.
There's less shade. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting and concerning to see how things. The rivers will eventually heal themselves, and they kind of do what they need to do. But
From a natural standpoint,
Yeah,
like the ecosystem with it.
But the
How
folks
you back
looking
into
to
the
go
cycle.
trout fishing
Yeah.
in their old stretches of river that they're familiar with,
Yeah.
those are not even existing
To
anymore.
find new spots. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. So
Yeah. But so nature will repair itself. The one thing that nature won't do is nature won't get in and remove tires and nails
Yeah.
and glass and trash and all those other things.
Right. And that's going to require a long period of time.
Yeah.
One, I think, first and foremost, and one of the reasons we decided to actually disband and dissolve, we were a very small grassroots nonprofit.
About how
Most-
maybe people
Well, we had an
volunteers?
active volunteer base of average of 15, 20 people might
Mhm.
show up for an activity. A lot of times it would only be 7 or 8, and it's
Okay.
a lot of us are older, and we had a system, and it was manageable because we were mostly removing roadside trash, and we would venture up into the woods 100 yards maybe and clean along the sides of the river, and we had the river really pretty pristine
Mhm.
back before the flood hit. But when you looked at how to do what we used to do after the flood, it was not even remotely feasible. One, because of just the level of biomass, and two, the strategic planning that's going to have to go into addressing debris that's actually now in the river, man-made,
Yeah.
a roof, a half of a cabin, a shed, a camper. So it would be an exercise in futility for us to try to operate like we used to. We would have had to have a completely new demographic of younger
Mhm.
people. A lot of them, we would have had to spend probably 3 to 4 times more energy and time out of our lives trying to reorganize the organization.
Yeah.
And as I said, we have other activities. I mean, I'm an artist, and Patty, my assistant director, is a gigging musician and songwriter, and we had to really look realistically what we're
Yeah.
capable of doing.
It would
So
have to probably be a full-time job.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't pay overtime.
it would have been, plus, I hate to point this out, but, we're all getting pretty old.
Yeah.
And the bones and joints and things aren't quite as limber and adept at
Mhm.
going down a boulder field into the water
That's true.
anymore.
Yeah.
We pulled a lawn chair out of the river back several months before the storm hit and winched it out with the Jeep. And, I fortunately dodged a massive boulder that came tumbling down
Mm.
from the side of the road
Yeah.
as the lawn chair was going up. I've got video of that. And that was kind of a big wake up call for me. It's like, I just had my knee replaced, and just about lost it, a few months later.
Man.
So, or lost my life possibly. But, so there were a lot of dynamics we had to look at as an organization about how to change. And luckily, we'd already partnered a lot with wildsouth.org,
Mhm.
who is a interesting and younger demographic, and very, it's an organization that already tackles really tough logistical problems.
Yeah.
By no means are they going to be able, they're already overwhelmed doing recovery work for property and things like that. By no means are they going to be able, there's not going to be any quick fixes for this.
Which I think I know they have some areas down in Alabama, different places in the South.
Right.
I think especially out in the Linville Gorge area, they're busy working, trying to clear trails.
Yeah, they're one of their primary job responsibilities as an organization is to clear trails.
Mm-hmm.
And that alone, in going back into the Linville Gorge and reopening trails safely, they work closely with the Forest Service to oversee and chart and map the trails and then get them safe for reopening. And that alone is a massive undertaking and will be for years. But they also, like us, launched into major home recovery, particularly in Old Fort area and Swanano areas, things like that, to really, Avery County particularly was hard hit, to really help some home and property owners just kind of recover enough to get their grounding, but they were so overwhelmed and in despair.
Yeah.
So they really had to divide their organization almost into two functioning components: home property recovery and then trail maintenance and recovery. And then us merging, we throw Wilson Creek onto their plate, which probably won't be addressed in a fashion for a while.
Yeah, and from speaking with Kevin at Wild South and also got in touch with Brittany with Foothills,
Right.
I appreciate you sending me their contacts to me. It sounds like there's maybe some more pressing safety concerns down there where they have, I think, the Forest Service, maybe some other agencies that are just trying to get things accessible and safe enough for people to get in there at some point.
And honestly,
do some work.
very little has been done on the safety aspect, and that is a huge concern, which honestly was another reason we felt like we could not be down there operating in a normal way, because we don't want and didn't want to encourage the recreational population that the minute the weather turns nice and things begin to green up, they will be returning, because they just will, regardless of what the situation is. And we feel there are going to be some very serious safety hazards, particularly with families and kids who want to go to the waterfront they used to picnic at. And as I said, those whole zones and buffer areas and beaches are completely gone and filled with biomass, which may also have rebar sticking out of the sand, metal roofs. We felt it would be irresponsible to be out there, even giving out trash bags to encourage folks, hey, things are we're trying to normalize again.
Yeah.
It's not cool, it's not cool to normalize. It's not going to be cool to normalize for a long time. I don't know what the answer to that is, because they're going to come anyway, regardless of restrictions. And I don't know what the Forest Service, how they're going to address that, and North Carolina Wildlife. So we basically on Wilson Creek have a lot of Forest Service land, and we have some private inholdings, and then we have North Carolina game lands on the upper part of the river. And we really have no idea how those are going to be addressed in terms of recreational use, or if it's just a free-for-all. And that's really, really concerning as an organization to know what the safety risks might be, particularly for kids and things like that.
Right.
So I don't have any great answers for that.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it's going to be a process, and it's really going to take some time before it gets back to the area that people know and love. And
we do understand that FEMA and government agencies are supposed to begin actually cleaning the river ecologically sometime once they've settle the property issues and things like that.
Mhm.
But again, that to me sounds like that's going to be a long ways off, and it's going to have to be very strategic. It's going to require heavy machinery. You can't send a group of 10 volunteers into a river where there's a cabin halfway in the river. So it's one of the things we've discussed at a joint meeting of coalition partners not that long ago was, where do you start? And we decided that the important thing is that you do start, and you pick an area where it may benefit the community the most.
Mhm.
And try to clean a small section of the river, do it safely, plan it out, map it, look at what machinery or equipment is needed, and then collectively we all show up to work together to address this small needle in a haystack area, which sounds really overwhelming and depressing in a way, that we're going to go out there and spend a day or 2 days focusing on a needle in a haystack, and then we're going to walk away from the rest of the river, which is just as bad as what we cleaned up. It's going to be a decade long or longer.
Got to start somewhere.
Yeah, it's going to be a long, long process. And it's going to be turned over to the next generation of conservation-minded folks and activists, and they're going to, hopefully, we can make a dent to begin. But it's going to be a long, long thing, long path for things to progress. And where the Forest Service it appears, may not have their normal staffing capabilities, and they were already stretched very thin. So there are many concerns on multiple levels right now.
And then with the whole maybe funding and all that stuff, it's
Right.
kind of up in the air right now.
Tons of unknowns,
Yeah.
and unknowns are very unsettling to people. Create a feeling of anxiety, despair sometimes, and that's kind of where we are. Taking a day at a time, a month at a time.
But from talking with Kevin and Brittany, it sounds like, I don't think obviously nothing's set in stone at the moment.
Correct.
But it sounds like there is some interest or burgeoning support to get some people maybe out there, hopefully in May or sometime.
Yeah, I think what we've discussed is one, the need for scouting and mapping the most damaged zones, and then identifying where to begin, and then possibly setting up kind of a community-based effort for a weekend in the maybe spring or summer. But a lot of it, we're going to have to see how it unfolds, because they're still working on the roads. There's still heavy machinery going in and out of there. From my understanding, they may be doing major work on the roads during this opportunity of this window where the public definitely doesn't need to be in some of these areas. It may be the time to go ahead and close the road down for periods of time, to blast and to widen it in some spots. So that may be part of the strategy, is to to do road construction now that would limit some of the influx of recreational users over this first season. Honestly, I think if I could throw a dart and say, what does Wes Waugh think should happen? I think there should be very limited recreational use for the next 2 years while the river has a chance to be mapped, major safety debris, addressed in some way, and then have kind of a staggered reopening recreationally. It doesn't usually work that way with public lands. The Forest Service is not an entity that normally restricts people's access. North Carolina Wildlife, the same. They don't like shutting down or controlling things over the access.